Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we're going to paint castle ruins in a monochromatic color scheme. Now for this painting, I just used Mars black and titanium white, but if you like, you can use a chromatic black, and depending on the colors that you choose, you can get some different moods to your painting. Now before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you can paint with me every week. And then make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials for today's painting. Now let's get started. Okay, today's canvas is a 12 by 16, and I did add a fairly generous layer of gesso to the surface of it, and I didn't sand it because I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to get rid of a little bit of that canvas texture, but then I also wanted to be able to see just a little bit of the brush stroke texture in the gesso. So here, hopefully you can see just a little bit of that texture. It's not a very strong texture at all. Now to get started, I'm going to start scrubbing in some pretty just general cloud shapes, and then we can come back and kind of pop some highlights in them. So I'm going to use my number 12 cloud brush, and it's dry. I have not wet it at all. Now I know that I want my castle over here, and so I'm going to make my sky a little bit darker in this area and fade down to a lighter area where the sky will meet up with the water. So I'm going to work pretty generally in my colors, so every time I go back for more paint, my colors will be a little bit different. Just overall it will get lighter. So I'm going to start by just grabbing some black. I'm not loading up with a ton of paint here. You don't want gobs of paint. Now another reason I used gesso, see just kind of a dark gray, is because when I'm doing this scrubbing technique, I find that an ungessoed canvas, or just a canvas right out of the package, it doesn't grab the paint quite as well, and then you get some streaks in the colors. So see, I'm just kind of doing it in whatever way I need to. I'm using like flat foot pressure there, so the entire length of the brush is on the canvas. And if that's not digging down into the texture well enough, I can come up on the tippy toe and kind of pirouette to really scrub it down in there. And don't worry about what kind of shapes you're getting here. Just get those colors on there. Make sure that you're covering all of the canvas underneath. It doesn't really matter if your colors blend or not. In some areas, I may deliberately try to blend two different colors together, and in some areas, I may leave a little bit of a line there. Now, if you're not using my cloud brush and you're using some other kind of a brush, just be sure that it's a brush that you're okay dedicating to scrubbing, because scrubbing like this, especially on a rough gessoed surface like I'm doing, will damage a brush, especially a very nice soft brush. Now, my cloud brushes are made specifically for this kind of work, and I've been scrubbing this brush to death for about a year now, and it's perfectly fine. Aside from some paint staining, which happens to any brush, the bristles have not flared out or broken or anything. So this brush is made to withstand this. And I feel like if the bristles did start to kind of puff out over time, that it would actually help. And it might become, you know, better and better at its job the older it gets. But we'll see. It looks like it's going to take a long time for that to happen. So see, I'm just slowly starting to get lighter. And if I add a color and I think, oh, that might be too light, that's not a big deal. I can just grab a little bit more of my dark color and add it back in. So see, I just picked up a little corner of black, and I'll just kind of stick it in there. That's better. Just be careful that you're not getting worms. You know, you don't want, I'll show you, you don't want a sky full of that. You don't want that. So you can definitely do the little pirouette thing, but kind of come around, be in a circle and take it off this way, and back, just in all kinds of different directions. And vary up your strokes. So I'm going back and forth between the flat foot pressure and the pirouetting. And this is an incredible workout on your arm. If your arm isn't sore by the time you're done with this background, then you either work out a lot more than I do, or you're doing it wrong. My arm already is sore. And I'm really not picking up any more black. There's still that gray on my brush, and a lot of this is still wet, so I'm picking that up as I go. I'll just pick up maybe a point of black here and there if I feel like I need it, if I have too much of a color difference. Like I feel like right there maybe I do. But see, I didn't pick up a ton, just that little bit on the corner. Just little bits at a time. There we go. So that's all I'm gonna do until I get about to here, about to where my water is gonna be. And then I'll stop. So I'm just gonna put you into time lapse for this last bit. Okay, I think that's good. I'm just gonna take as pure of white as I can. I'm not gonna worry about cleaning off my brush, and just go across the bottom, at least on this side. This is really all gonna be covered by our cliff and castle. I'm just kind of pulling that light color down, making sure that my sky goes all the way down to where it's going to meet with the water. You're not really going to be able to see too much of a transition line between where the sky and the water meet. All right, I'm going to go to my 1-inch flat brush, wet it in the jar a bit, and I'm going to pick up a color that's going to be pretty similar to this color. It doesn't have to be exact. If it's a little different, then I want it to be just a little bit darker. So a bit of black and my white. I'm going to use the edge of my brush to just kind of start, but I don't want a hard horizon line. So see, I'm lightening my pressure. Notice my bristles are not bending, and I'm just dusting that line out. Light, super light pressure. Let's darken that a bit as we bring it down. Super light pressure to go up into that first color. If you have a hard line, like I have a hard line there, just turn your brush on the edge. Put a little bit of pressure on it, and that line goes right away. There we go. A little bit darker, even though that's probably going to be covered by ground. Light pressure. Now, if you don't know where all your elements are going to go, you can absolutely make sure that you fill it all in. I didn't worry about this spot because I know that that's going to be covered. But like I said, if you don't know for sure, go ahead and cover all of it. You don't have to leave a blank spot like I did. Let's go ahead and add just a few little points of some highlight into our clouds. Now my clouds are pretty much dry. It's a little wetter right here. If you've never painted on a gessoed surface before, you're gonna find a couple of things. First of all, the paint goes on super, super smooth. If you can see my water here, it is just, that blend is very, very smooth looking. Second, it takes a little bit of extra elbow grease to get down into the texture, particularly if you let it be textured like I did. See, you can see my brush stroke marks there. If you sand it, you may not have that issue quite so much, but also the gesso is very, very dry, and it will just quickly absorb all of the moisture out of your brush, out of the paint that you're using, so your paint's gonna seem like it dries faster. Now, I don't always like that, so that's why I don't use gesso all the time, but for certain techniques, particularly this technique, I love to use gesso to have that nice, dry, textured surface. Okay, I'm gonna go to my number 6 cloud brush, and again, this brush is dry as well. And we're just gonna kind of start adding some highlights into our clouds. I'm not gonna get too crazy. Those of you who have painted with me for a while, you know that I could spend a very long time painting clouds, but we're not gonna do that today. I just grabbed some of that color. It's almost pure white. There's just a hint of the black in there. But can you see how much paint? I really just got it on the one side, and there are no globs of paint. That side doesn't really have any paint on it. So I'm gonna kind of take a cue from the shapes I have going on in here. Wherever I see these edges like that, those are places I'm gonna say that's the edge of a cloud, and I'm gonna put a little bit of highlight on most of them, maybe not all of them. I'm gonna do about half foot pressure. See how my brush is bent, but it's not flat? That's gonna help me keep that color right at the end. I really don't wanna do any of that pirouetting in here because that's gonna create like a little ball, a little spot of color. And I don't want that. I want to just kind of nudge it into a few places. Again, no worms. Do not make worms. Kind of take a spot, move it around, let it break off. Maybe it comes down in a couple directions. Maybe it even comes back. Just don't do this. You know, don't create a line of color that goes from there to there all over your sky. You're just gonna have a sky full of worms. If you have a hard edge that you just can't get blended out, like if I keep scrubbing that, I'm just gonna keep laying down more of the light paint. I can just get a color, a very, very small amount. See, there's not a lot of paint coming off of my brush. And with super light pressure, I can just kind of come in behind that color and blend it in. Very light pressure. And I know that clouds can be really challenging and they can be kind of frustrating. I hear people say it all the time, you know, I'll never be able to paint clouds. But don't think like that, because if you tell yourself that, then you never will be able to paint clouds. One of my favorite quotes in the whole world is by Henry Ford. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. So don't tell yourself that you can't do something. You're the one who gives yourself permission to learn how to do something or to be able to do it. So say, all right, I'm having a hard time. I'm not able to do this right now. But if I keep practicing, I'll figure it out. And then you don't discourage yourself and you'll be able to do it. It took me forever and ever also. So don't get discouraged. One day, all of a sudden, it will click. And if it's not the technique that I'm showing you, you know, it's one that you just come up with, or it's one that somebody else shows you, it's perfectly fine. There's a million ways to do clouds. So find the one that works for you and focus on that. Maybe the way I do it will never be the right technique for you, and that's okay too. Mostly just using that little bit of white. Again, can you see how much is on there? There's really not a lot of paint. I want to put some up in here, but I feel like the white is going to be way too bright. So I'm going to mix up a light gray color. There we go. And just get some of it off. Very light pressure. And I still feel like that might have been just a little too light. I'm just gonna finish up the shapes that I'm working on right now though, and then I'll go deal with it. Okay, pull a little more black. This is not a lot of paint, guys, remember. That's how much paint I'm using. Just come in behind it. And you can cover things up with clouds. You know, if you get a spot where you're just like, I just can't fix that spot, it just looks horrible. Just put a little bright spot over top of it, and then it'll be hidden. I don't think I'm going to do a whole lot more, especially up in this area. Just a few little spots. If you want a little bit more information on painting clouds, a little bit more of an in-depth lesson where we focus primarily on clouds, then you can click the little information iCard right up here, and I have a couple of videos where the clouds are the main focus of the painting that we do. So I'll link those up in there for you. Okay, down here at the bottom, I still have a little bit of that dark color, but see, again, it's dry. There's next to nothing coming off, but it will show down here, and that's what I want. So I'm gonna get a little bit more white on my brush than I have been. I picked it up just a little bit heavier because I want some nice clouds down here. Still doing my 1/2 foot pressure. And if you can tell, just a little bit of that dark kind of scrubbed underneath that cloud shape. And it seems a bit like a shadow on the underside of the cloud. Some nice bright ones down toward the horizon. And then we're ready to move on. All right, now we can start drawing our castle and our land. And I'm gonna use this piece of charcoal. Now, I don't actually recommend that you use charcoal, especially if your paint is still a little bit wet like mine is, because the charcoal will stain. The reason I'm using it is because my only other option is a piece of pink chalk, and that will absolutely affect the color of my paint, as you may have seen in our haunted house video that we did over Halloween. So I'm going to use this and just hope it doesn't stain too bad. I'm going to start with my land, and I'm going to bring it up about 1/3 of the way up the canvas. It might be a little bit more than that. Let's see, we'll start right about here. And this is all just very general. I can make changes to any of this as I go. So right about there, and I want my cliff to end right about here, just below the horizon. Don't make it end on the horizon, because that's going to kind of push the cliff back farther, and then everything's going to seem really big. But see how my horizon is really right about here? But I'm making my cliff here. That's going to pull it forward a bit for us. And then I'm just going to kind of come up. Just kind of sketch it on like that. We'll say that's about good. The bottom of our cliff is relatively horizontal. Maybe we'll have another one right here. Just a smaller one. A little piece of land that's kind of closer to us. And then the land that we're kind of standing on. Let's get the bottom of that in there. The land that we're standing on right about here. Now the castle can look however you want. I just kind of made this castle up as I went along, and you're free to do that as well. I'm going to take the top of it up here, and you probably won't be, well, hopefully you'll be able to see that. It's pretty dark. I'm just going to start with the top. Remember, you can make changes to this castle as you go, as you're painting. I'll just say it's right about here. Maybe there's a little broken corner. You don't need to make sure that the top edges are real flat because it's an old castle ruin, so there could be parts broken off. But you do want to make sure that the edges are relatively vertical. I mean, there could be a little bit of leaning going on in there, but stone doesn't typically lean too terribly much unless, you know, you're the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Take this little bit out here, another little broken corner. And we'll come straight down. Look online, there are so many castle ruins out there. Lots of good inspiration for you for this painting. So I just looked at dozens and dozens of photos and then just kind of came to my canvas and made it up. Just so I remember that that's an individual shape. I will lose all of those lines. I'm just kind of keeping it in mind right now so that I know where I want to place everything else. We'll have this one, let's see, there's the back edge. We'll have this one come up to meet it. Let's do another little piece right here. Maybe this is more like an old fortress or something. Maybe we even have like a little piece down in here with a seriously broken wall. And then as we fill this in, start adding highlights, you can build other little pieces of structure or building in here that it really wouldn't matter if you drew it all in right now because we're going to lose it anyway. So I think that's a good place to start. I'm going to take my 1/2 inch flat and wet it in my jar really good. And I'm going to mix up a color that's almost black, but I don't want pure black. I'm not going to have pure black in very many places in this painting, if at all. I'm going to load up with black, pull a little bit of white in. I just want a super, super dark gray that's almost black. I think that's good. And then I'm going to start generally filling in my shapes. I'm going to work pretty loosely, except along the edges. I'm going to fill in the cliffs with this color as well. So I'm just going to put you into time lapse while I fill all of this in. Okay, now at the bottom of my cliff here, I'm gonna get just a little more white because I wanna remember where I want that to be. And I know I want that part to be lighter anyway, so I mixed up a color that's a bit lighter. And I'm gonna make sure that my bottom edge is fairly crisp. And I'm gonna bring my brush stroke just kind of straight up. It can blend in with that darker color. That's perfectly fine. I just don't want to lose that. And that's really just for my own, you know, kind of a reminder to myself. It's not really to help it look any way in particular. It's just to help me remember. Notice I did cut around this little cliff. I'm going to do that one just slightly darker. Again, just as a reminder to myself of where it is. If you don't feel like you need those kind of reminders, then don't worry about it. Just fill it all in. There's still a little bit of that gray on my brush, but I'm just going to pick up black. but it's still not quite pitch black. I was gonna fill this part in, but I think I'm actually gonna just leave that for now because we need to add some detail into our water, and then I'm just gonna end up painting over this anyway. So we'll come back and add that in a minute. All right, now we're gonna start adding some highlights to our castle. And really this first layer is gonna be quite dark still. It's just a way for us to kind of say, here's a face of the building, here's another face, and then we can build them from there. So I want to make sure that I don't cover too much of this texture, so I'm going to use a soft brush. This is my 5/8 inch angle brush. If you use a firmer brush, like the 1/2 inch flat that we used to fill it in, the bristles are much stiffer and stronger, and so they'll dig down into that texture more. So it really just depends on what you want. I want to see a little of the texture, so I'm going to use a softer brush. Now I'm going to wet it in my jar and wipe it off pretty good on the edge. And then I'm just going to lightly wipe it on a paper towel once or twice, because I'm almost going to be dry brushing. So there's a little moisture in here to help me move the paint around a little bit, but not so much that, again, that I lose that texture. So like I said, we're going to start pretty dark. I'm going to load up with a bit of black and pull some white into it. I'm looking for a color that's just a little lighter than what we've got going on there already. And I think that's good. I'm wiping quite a bit of it off because I don't want globs of paint. So I'm going to come in with the edge and say that maybe there's an edge to the building right there. I'm just going to kind of touch along that edge, maybe even bring one part down a bit, say there's a little cracked bit, and then lightly streak that down. See how I kind of have to work to get a little bit of coverage, and that's what I want. If it's just covering, then I'm going to lose everything, and the buildings are just going to get lighter and lighter. Pull some of that over a little. You can go both up and down and side to side, and that might help it look like it's made of bricks. That same color, and I'm going to define this top edge. And do these however you like. You know, as you start adding elements to the buildings, you can decide what's in front, what's behind, what's broken, what isn't, all of those things. So I've got my front edge, my back edge. We're gonna say the roof is gone and we can see kind of into the top of that building. And maybe this edge, let's bring it over just a little bit more, kind of broken. And kind of moves back down toward that. And then I'm just going to add a slight bit of a highlight there so I remember that's a face of the building, even though this area I want to be in shadow. So don't worry about getting anything too light. So now this looks a little bit more three-dimensional than it did before. Let's do that same thing on all of the buildings here with roughly the same color. So I'm going to come over to this one. This one's kind of weird shaped. I'm going to say that the wall stops right there, and then it's kind of broken down this direction. And you absolutely can make that up as you go. Don't feel intimidated by that and think that you have to have some solid plan about what kind of shape these buildings are. I have a little corner missing that I don't want missing there, so I just picked up some more black. I'm just going to put that back in there. Lighten the color up again and put my little bit of a highlight on it. I should probably be using a smaller brush for this building, but I'm too lazy to change it right now. Let's actually say that that's a corner right here. This building's turned a little bit different than some of the other ones. This is going to be the darker side. And that little line there kind of reminds me of it. Hopefully you can see it. I know this color isn't too terribly different. And up here. My brush was just a little bit too dry, so I just dunked the long point of my angle brush into the water. So I didn't want to get too much water, but I wanted to soften up that paint just a little bit. None of this is set in stone. If I come back later and I decide, oh, I don't like the shape of that, I can absolutely change it, and so can you. So just kind of play with these shapes and have fun. Worry about making them the perfect shape later. Now this taller one, I'm going to say it's facing a different way. So I'm going to make this the wall that's facing us. Let's jut that out just a little bit there. In fact, I want to pull that right side out just a little bit more because I just decided to. It's not a ton, but just enough so that it doesn't look like a skyscraper, you know, just super, super straight and solid. The broken bit is facing away from us, so here's the other wall. And then this one, I want this one to actually come in front of that piece of building and maybe hook up with this one. Okay, so there's the main bits of our castle. We can also just come into these darker areas and decide there's a little structure in here. So let's do that, because I know that I want a little structure. These paper plates are so dang loud. I want a little structure right here. Maybe it's an old living space or an animal stable, something. So I'm going to take a top edge across. Maybe I'll cut it in front of this building a little bit. And we'll say that it used to have a sloped roof that's long since fallen off or rotted away. So I'm just using the edge of my brush to kind of take that back. Same exact angle on the other side. I'm actually going to take a darker color just to get rid of that bit of this wall that's showing in there. And then maybe in this other dark spot, just to the left of it, maybe we've got like some kind of a road or a walkway that's leading up into these buildings. So I'm just going to generally kind of tap a shape into here. It's like a little wall that you would walk on or ride a carriage on up to the castle. And we'll do the little wall on the other side. It pretty much mirrors it. All right, now we know where all of our structures are. We can actually start working on putting in the highlights and kicking back shadows and all of that. So I'm just going to take the same color, pull some more white in, and lighten it up. I don't want to go crazy light though, but definitely lighter. I'm just going to wipe a little bit of it off. And we'll start with this building here. So again, start up at the top edge, very light pressure. Can you see how I'm just kind of touching and almost just like pulling it away, and it kind of streaks it down. And that's what I'm going to do all across here. really only on this face, anything facing this direction. So this wall probably won't get much of this color. Make sure that my edge isn't darker than everything else. See how that texture is catching it and giving us a little bit of texture into the building. Now I'm going to go the other direction. Make sure that I can see this corner. That's probably a little bit lighter than I want, a little bit heavier than I want, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. Okay, let's take that same color a little bit right up into here. And let it fade down sooner, because this piece of the wall would be casting a shadow in there. Also, remember that this angled part is the fourth wall. So we have this wall facing us. This wall is also facing us. This one is facing to our left. This piece of angle is facing off this way. So don't take this highlight through there unless you want to also highlight this wall. Remember that this piece of wall and this piece of wall are going to have about the same amount of highlight and shadow, just like this piece of wall and this piece of wall will. So see how I left that dark? That indicates that it's facing in a different direction than this wall. I'm going to go through and add this color just like I did there onto the rest of the pieces of the building, and then we'll move on. This building is at a little bit of a different angle, so I did put the slightest bit of that highlight color in here, just a teeny bit. Almost feels like this is kind of an octagonal shaped building. I'm gonna let it be a weird shaped building. I kind of like that. Okay, let's go even lighter. And work these shadows and highlights as much as you want. You know, you can do layer upon layer upon layer. You could go right to it with your final color if that's what you really want to do. I kind of like to build them, especially with the texture, because it shows all of the colors underneath. So this is my lighter color. And notice I'm not going to take it down quite as far, and if I do, it's going to be very little of it. Make sure we've got some on that edge there. A couple swipes in the opposite direction. And again, notice I'm not working on the shadows just yet. We will go and put the shadows in at the end. So if you take away your shadow, don't sweat it, let it go. Now, I'm not going to take this highlight color all the way to that corner because I feel like this little piece of the wall might be blocking a little bit of the light. That's just how I feel about it though. If it looks weird in your building to not take it all the way there, then take it all the way over there. And again, I'm not going to take this brighter highlight all the way to the top of our little walkway. That part of it's going to start moving into some shadow. All right, let's go about as bright as we're gonna go. And I'm gonna go down to my number 8 bright. And I did wet it in the jar and wiped it just a little bit on a paper towel. I'm gonna load up with about white. There was the tiniest bit of gray in there. But this is pretty dang close to white. We're gonna reserve white for last, for the very brightest pops. So same thing, but I'm being quite selective. And I'm not worried just yet about the top edges of my shapes. We'll reserve that for when we do white. Again, making sure that I get all the way to the edge. I don't want my buildings to have a little black edge. Just the slightest hint of that color over here. And that might be too much, but again, we haven't done our shadows yet, so it's okay. Let's get a bit of that in here. See how I'm fading it so it gets darker toward the bottom. And I'm going to fade it as I get closer to this corner here. Nice and bright there, darker this way. You know that sometimes these longer videos can seem intimidating to a newer painter, but I really feel like, you know, everything we're doing here is really the same type of thing that we always do. It's just that we're spending a little bit of extra time on it, you know, rather than just laying down a color and saying, okay, that part's done, let's lay down another color over here and be done. You know, we spend a little extra time and build the layers, but really what we're doing is the same thing that we always do. So if you're watching this and you feel like it might be above your abilities, I encourage you to try it. You know, I don't think that we're using any techniques that are particularly difficult. You know, if you feel like you've got a good amount of brush control to be able to control your pressure, like I'm doing here, and you know how much paint to load up, I think as long as you have those kind of basics down, you can do this. And I don't think there's anything wrong with trying something that you feel like is above your abilities. You know, even if you're not able to pull it off for some reason, I think that you'll learn something. You know, trying things outside of what we normally do, whether it's technique or colors, materials, subject matter, anything, working in something that you don't feel comfortable doing is a growing opportunity. And I think that that's a valuable thing. You never know what you're going to pick up, but it's guaranteed you won't pick anything up if you don't try. That's the only way I can promise you that you won't learn anything, is by not even trying. Again, this bright highlight, I'm not going to take it all the way up, probably going to stop right about there. I'm just going to put a hint of it in here. If you've been painting for a little while, but you feel, you know, intimidated to try something a little bit more difficult than what you've done, then I really highly encourage you to just do it, because you never know what you can do. You know, if you've got some skills built up, but you haven't really challenged yourself yet, I think you may be really surprised at what you can do if you give yourself a challenge. If you feel like your texture is too much, I feel like the texture here is just a little too strong. I just dipped my brush into a little bit of water. I'm going to mix that in with my paint. So my paint's just a little bit wetter than it was. And now when I go over it, see, I fill in that texture a little bit more. We are about ready to add our bright white, kick our shadows in, add some windows, and move on to the ground. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go straight into white, just pure white. There's not enough of that gray on my brush to make a difference, but if on your brush you feel like there's still too much gray, just wash it off. I'm going to start by highlighting the top edges of my building. Now, not every edge, you know, this edge right here is kind of facing this way where our shadows are, so I'm probably not going to put any bright white there, but for sure on the top edge here. And then maybe I'll just dash a little bit of this bright white in there, just a little, really loosely, getting a few lines in there. We'll put a bit here. Even though this part's in shadow, the top edge is catching the light. A little right there. And see, I'm doing it loosely, so even that top edge is broken a bit, which will help it seem like there's some broken stones that are catching the light and reflecting it. If it's too solid, it's going to look much more crisp and less broken on that edge. I want it to look quite broken. Now on this little piece, because these angled bits right here, they're receding back behind these buildings. So I don't want to put the bright white all the way across the top edge. So I'm going to start here at the corner and lighten my pressure until I'm not seeing any paint at all. And so the fact that that color kind of recedes back is helping it seem like it's moving into a shadow. And same on this side. Whoa, that was a bit aggressive. That's all right. Do want a little bit of it on the wall right here. I don't feel like this part's really in shadow, because I feel like these buildings are up against each other. I don't feel like there's a gap there, but right down here there's going to be a shadow, and I know that that's bright, but like I said, we haven't put our shadows in yet, and the shadows are going to be quick. I'm bringing a bright white bit down there, kind of say that little corner's kind of crushed. I know that sometimes watching me do layers, it must get boring for you guys. Oh, another layer of a very slightly different color. But especially in this painting, I hope that you can see how the different layers help build toward a particular look. You know, if I just went straight to white, then there'd be way too much difference, and I'd miss out on some of those stone-like textures because of the different colors and different values that we have in there. Let's not forget this edge. I feel like this side, it might have a little bit more of a highlight to it, because there's nothing blocking it. It's facing off in a different direction. Obviously that's too bright, but that's fine for now. I'm just going to remind myself that I want a little bit of a highlight on that side. Now at the top edge of our little stone wall here, and it kind of trails off right there. Maybe just the tiniest hint of it there. Probably not though, I think that's too much right there. I'll take that away in just a minute. Okay, let's work on our shadows. The shadows will be quick and then we can move on. So my brush is clean. I'm gonna grab just a hint of white, mix it over here, get a nice dark color that is not quite black, but very, very close to black. Again, kind of wipe a bit of it off. And where I want a nice dark shadow, I'm just gonna do the exact same brush stroke, just dusting over it. Wherever it got too light, like right there, too light, just pull a hint of that black over it. See how it doesn't completely obliterate that color. It just kicks it back a bit. But then if I do want to get rid of a color like that was too much, just put a little extra pressure so I can lay down a bit more paint on it. And that's what I'm going to do through all of my shadows, just to make sure that everything's looking the way I want it to. A little bit of a hard line there, so I'm just dusting a hint of it over the bottom. This is a bit bright, so I'm not taking it away altogether, just kicking it back a bit. Oh, I forgot my top edge there. Now see, you can still see little hints of that first layer highlight color that I put along this edge, because it wouldn't be pitch black there. There's a little bit of reflected light, so you can still see the different faces of the buildings, but it's not bright, so it helps create a nice contrast between the dark and the light side, which makes it seem like the light hitting these is very strong light. In fact, I think I'm going to take that back just a little bit more. I still feel like it's too bright. Okay, let's add some windows. I just dipped into my water. I don't want to use my paint quite as dry this time. I'm going to use it about like normal paint, whatever normal paint means. I'm just getting black. We're going to add some windows. I'm just going to decide where there's a window, place my brush there, and drag it over a little bit. And you can put them wherever you like, as many or as few as you like. I'm going to go to my number 6 bright, load up with some white, and just add a little bit of a highlight onto the bottom edge of each window. You'll be able to see it better on some windows than on others, but I think that's all right. These ones that are in the darker area, I'm going to make the color just a little bit darker. I don't want the bright, bright white on there. Okay, I've decided to change this a little bit. I'm not going to do the ground at the bottom here, so I'm going back to my 1/2 inch flat. I'm going to pick up just a little poke of white, mix up that dark color again, and what I'm going to do is just kind of extend this piece out just a little bit. We'll say that that cliff kind of comes around and it ends over there somewhere. Just put a little bit of cliff in there. And fill in the rest of that with our dark color. And there's going to be a little less disconnect between all of these. We'll say it's just one big landmass. Now, before we start doing any color detail on the grasses or bushes or whatever is living there, I want to add some steps, kind of coming from somewhere up in this area. Maybe there's a little doorway up here that we can't see that kind of wraps around. So, back to my number 8 bright. Good morning, Mr. Moon. And I'm picking up mostly white. There's a little bit of that gray in there, so it's not pure white. I'm just going to decide where my steps start. I want to make sure that my bristles always go horizontally. Don't hold your brush at an angle like that. It doesn't matter what direction you're moving. Make sure it's horizontal. So we'll start here. Maybe it's coming from over here at this little entryway. So I'm just going to pull it over a bit, come down. Maybe there's a little landing area here. And maybe the steps come down this way now. Just some crazy old steps. Maybe we even have like a little flat spot here and it kind of turns into a path. Back up to some steps to come up here. And if we decide we don't like that later, we can paint it over when we add the grasses. Okay, so I kind of picture the ground here being a soft, grassy area, not a lot of thick, dense brush. So I'm going to use this natural bristle brush, and it's dry. This one's about 3/4 of an inch wide. So I'm going to poke into some black. See, I didn't pick up a lot of black, and kind of stab my brush into it. Maybe twirl just a little bit. Get that black kind of dispersed throughout the bristles so there's no clumps. See, if I tap my brush, I just get little spots. That's what we're looking for here. I'm going to come in and grab just a little poke of white that is starting to dry out and do the same thing. I'm just going to start somewhere. Since I'm not sure how bright this is just yet, I'm going to start in an area where I know I want it to be bright, because I can easily make that brighter if it's not bright enough. But if I start over here in the dark and it's too bright, I'm going to have to work at that. So, see, my brush isn't bending. It's just touching. I'm just getting a hint of texture in there. Turn my brush a little as I come down. Sorry, my canvas is so baggy from scrubbing on it earlier. So I'm just doing that same thing, just a little bit quicker. If you feel like you're getting polka dots or the same thing, just stab into your paint again. Wow, Mr. Moon, you're loud today. Every time he starts meowing like that, somebody always comments that he sounds lonely. I might have said that before, but I assure you, he is not lonely. He gets all of the love. Every time my color's a little bit different. This one's a little darker, so I think I'm going to take it up into here. I'm going to take it right to the edge of my steps. If it kind of overlaps my steps a little, that's okay. These are old ruins. Maybe these steps haven't been used in 150 years or 200 years, whatever. Let's go just a little bit lighter. I don't want to overdo it on the texture here. Trying to keep my canvas from bouncing around too much. See, it's very soft. Get right up against my step. See, I kind of covered that edge a bit. Maybe I'll cover this edge a bit. Lighten up just a little because we're starting to move down here. Covering that path a little bit. It comes down into this piece. Let's add just a hint more white in there. If you use globs of paint here, you're gonna get a lot of texture. And if that's what you want, that's perfectly fine. I just want it to look really soft and grassy. You know, I kind of think of those castle ruins that you see in Scotland or Ireland. And there's a lot of grass around them, you know, not so much shrubs or, I mean, you might have the occasional shrub or tree, but lots of grasses. Let it go up outside of your shape there a bit, that's okay. As I'm working closer to us, so down here, I can start applying a little bit extra pressure, maybe using a little bit of extra paint so that the grasses seem a little bit bigger. I'm going to keep that fairly bright color as I work down into here. See how my brush is bending a little bit now. And that's giving me a bit more texture in there. Just lightening my pressure as I move back here again. See, my brush isn't bending anymore. I'm liking the way that grass is looking. I think I just want to pop it a little brighter right in here. That might have been a little bit too much paint. That's kind of thick. My easel is so noisy. Everything is so noisy. My paper plates are noisy. My cat is noisy. My easel's noisy. Thankfully, my studio is relatively quiet. Light pressure to get rid of a line there. And we'll go a little hint lighter in here. Okay, for our cliff, I cleaned off my brush and I dried it pretty good on a paper towel, so it's a little bit damp. I'm gonna grab a bit of white. It's not a ton of paint, but it's kind of just slashed onto one side, not on the other. I'm gonna start right here at the top and just lightly drag it down. Don't worry about getting it down into your water. Kind of making this look like cliffs. Maybe a little bit more right here as we get forward, a little bit lighter. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to grab a little bit of black. I'm going to start at the bottom and streak upwards. Again, don't worry about that, where it's getting down into the water. You know, that looks like a mess. Back into the white and streak down again, about to the bottom of the cliff, and I feel like that'll be good. Make some areas a little lighter than others. I'm going to go to my number 8 filbert, and I feel like this is about the last part, and then we'll be done. I'm going to get some white, mix it in my black, get a dark color, a dark gray. And I'm going to come in here right at the bottom of my cliff and kind of start almost sketching. Let's just go ahead and cover that up. A little bit of white. I'm really just going to kind of go back and forth between some lighter and darker colors. I'm going to keep it fairly dark at the base of the cliff. See, and then it kind of blends in with what we already have. So we don't really need to repaint all of the water unless you want to. I'm just going to keep going with what I'm doing here, and we'll see how it looks when I'm done. Just really using the very tip of my filbert. You see that? It's just the tip of it. I'm not using it flat at all. Not worried about that charcoal that I decided I didn't want to put the land in because it'll just mix in with my color and help me get a gray color. So that's not a big deal. Just short, jerky motions, you know, like a scribble almost. I'm just going over dry paint. But because I'm working in the same colors, it doesn't matter, you know, if it's too light, like that's way too light. I'm not sweating it. I can just pick up a slightly darker color and go right back over it. And because I'm working in the exact same color scheme, it'll blend in and it won't look out of place. A little bit of extra water. My brush was getting pretty dry. And then I'm going to come in with a slightly larger amount of white. Not a ton more, but a little bit more. And with less pressure, a little less scrubbing, just kind of laying down little bits of that bright white. It'll look like maybe there's some little bits of water kind of breaking out there. Especially right here at the base of the cliffs. I want just a hint of that bright white. Okay, last part. I think we are about done. I just wiped that white off of my brush. Mixed what was left in with some black, so this color is very, very dark, almost black, about the same color we used on the base of the hills here. And I'm gonna just inject a tiny bit of that in here at the base of the cliffs too. This is the darkest part of our water. I'm just gonna pop the cliff right here just a little bit, and then I think we're done. And there's our monochromatic landscape with castle ruins. I kind of have a thing for exploring abandoned places, and I would absolutely love to go exploring in this old castle. I hope you enjoyed painting this with me and using layers and colors to help create shadows, highlights, and textures in our castle. If you'd like to get a notification whenever I upload a new video, or have sales on my brushes, or just find out about any other fun new things coming up, make sure that you subscribe to my mailing list. You can just click the little information iCard up here and it'll take you right to my website where you can do so. Thank you as always for painting with me, everyone, and I'll see you next time.